They said it was a routine security check. But somehow, she was the only one asked to stand up. Dressed in a tailored suit, seated in first class, boarding pass in hand, she had done everything right. Yet within minutes, whispers spread. Eyes stared. Phones lifted. And security escorted a black woman off the plane as if she didn't belong there. Passengers assumed she was in the wrong seat. Crew members avoided her gaze. No one asked who she was. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just another traveler. And this wasn't just another flight. By the time the plane doors closed, a decision had already been made, one that would cost the airline more than its reputation. Within hours, billions of dollars would vanish, careers would unravel, and a public reckoning would begin. But in that moment, walking down the aisle under the weight of humiliation, she was just another black woman being told she didn't fit the image of power. What happens when the person you try to silence is the one holding the power all along? For most of her life, she had been the exception in every room she entered. Boardrooms, investment summits, private equity conferences where billion-dollar decisions were sealed with steady handshakes. She had built her name from nothing. Long nights, sharper instincts, and discipline that left no room for mistakes. In an industry where very few women looked like her, she didn't just survive. She dominated. By the time she became CEO of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm, her life moved at the speed of global markets. Flights blurred into meetings. Meetings turned into acquisitions. Entire companies shifted direction when she moved capital. Airlines knew her as a top-tier client. Lounges welcomed her by name. She had spent years in the air, closing deals between cities. But outside the polished glass towers and curated press releases, she understood another truth. No matter how refined the suit, no matter how exclusive the seat, no matter how powerful the title, there were still spaces where she felt the pause when she walked in. The double take, the subtle scan, the quiet question lingering behind polite smiles. Does she really belong here? That morning, she pushed the thought aside. It was just another flight, another first-class boarding pass, another negotiation waiting on the other side of the runway, one tied to a $5 billion funding decision. She stepped onto the plane calm and focused. She had no idea that before takeoff, she would become the issue to be resolved. At first, it was subtle. A flight attendant lingered at her seat, studying her boarding pass twice. The smile felt rehearsed. Minutes later, 2 security officers stepped onto the plane. The cabin shifted. Conversations softened. They walked directly toward her. Her pulse quickened, but her expression remained steady. Calm was a skill she had mastered long ago. They asked for her boarding pass again. First class, seat 2A. There had been a concern, they said. A report. Someone might be in the wrong seat. She glanced around. Every other passenger remained untouched. No one else was being questioned. She handed over her ID. Platinum status. Years of loyalty. Hundreds of flights. It didn't matter. Phones began rising, not to intervene, but to record. A silent audience gathered as the officers asked her to stand. The aisle felt narrow as she rose. Exposed. Observed. Reduced. Whispers trailed behind her. Maybe it's a mistake. She doesn't look like. The sentence didn't need to finish. At the aircraft door, she was told to step off while they sorted things out. The plane would not depart until she complied. A cabin full of strangers waited to see what she would do. She stepped off. The door closed behind her. Inside, passengers settled back into comfort. Outside, she stood under fluorescent lights with no clear explanation of what rules she had broken. Minutes stretched into 20. No supervisor. No clarity. Just vague references to protocol. Her phone buzzed with messages from her executive team. The $5 billion funding package tied to this very airline was set to finalize within 48 hours. The same airline now holding her on a jet bridge like a suspect. Something shifted inside her. The humiliation remained. The anger simmered. But beneath it came something colder. Calculation. When the supervisor finally arrived, his tone was polished. A misunderstanding, he called it. A misunderstanding that had delayed a flight. A misunderstanding that had singled her out. A misunderstanding that somehow only involved her. Then his phone rang. His face changed as he listened. The confidence drained. Someone had looked up her name. Not just a passenger. Not just a frequent flyer. But the CEO, whose firm controlled a $5 billion funding decision critical to the airline's future expansion. Silence settled over the jet bridge. Apologies followed quickly. They were sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry for the confusion. Sorry if she felt uncomfortable. If she felt uncomfortable. She looked past him at the plane. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about power, and who people think should have it. He offered to reboard her. Complimentary perks. Private accommodations. Anything to smooth it over. But some damage cannot be upgraded away. She did not return to her seat. The next morning, in a quiet boardroom far from the runway, her firm reviewed the pending $5 billion funding package. Expansion plans paused. Projections reconsidered. Not out of revenge. Out of principle. If an airline could not recognize the dignity of a passenger in first class, what did that say about its culture? About its leadership? About the assumptions woven into its system? The funding was withdrawn. Public statements promised internal reviews and retraining. Executives scrambled. Headlines questioned more than a delayed departure. They questioned systemic bias at the highest levels. For her, the moment was complicated. No amount of money erased the walk down that aisle. No policy update removed the sting of being seen as suspicious before being seen as successful. She had power. But what about those who don't? What about the countless people who cannot turn humiliation into leverage? Who endure it quietly because they lack a boardroom to retreat to? This was never just one incident. It was a reflection of perception, a bias, of the fragile line between authority and assumption. The plane eventually reached its destination. But the real question remains, has our society? And until that answer changes, how many more people will be asked to stand up simply because someone decided they didn't belong?